Welcome back. It is week 3 of Advent. And just like always, let's start with some review. What is Advent? Advent means the coming. And it's this time that we spend preparing our hearts to celebrate the coming of Jesus, the promised Messiah that his people had been waiting for since the Garden of Eden. We learned that Advent is about waiting, it's about watching, and worshiping. Say that with me. Ready? Advent is waiting, watching, and worshiping. And during our time of Advent, one of the ways that we are getting our hearts ready to celebrate Christmas is by learning about this cast of characters, these people that God included in that very first coming. We're learning from them how with the first coming, how did they wait? How did they watch? And how did they worship? And by paying attention to those things, we are learning how to wait, how to watch, and how to worship until Jesus comes again. So we started with the prophets. And we're gonna light a candle for each character. And do you remember why we light a candle for each character? That's right. We light a candle to remind us that Jesus is the light of the world. And the prophets' messages, remember we met Isaiah, that prophet who gave a message of hope 700 years before Jesus was born? His message of hope, his message that was a reminder of the promise that God had made, it was like the don't stop, guys, be patient. Follow me, because I will keep my promise to you. That message of hope was a little bit of light in the darkness. And then when Jesus showed up, he brought all sorts of light into the darkness. That's why we light a candle, to remind us that Jesus is the light of the world. So we met the prophets, and remember, they gave messages that brought hope, messages that brought light, while God's people were waiting. Then, last week, we met the angels. The angels were also messengers. They brought messages to God's people. They brought a message. Remember, the angel Gabriel brought a message to Mary to tell her, hey, you're gonna have a baby. I know you're not married yet, but don't worry, because the baby inside of you is special. The baby inside of you is the Son of God. That was a really important message for Mary to get so that she would know what was going on. And then God sent an angel to give her husband Joseph a message, her husband-to-be, saying, keep Mary, don't divorce her. Stay with her because I have a plan. I am in the middle of this and I am doing something amazing. And we saw that God sent messenger angels to the shepherds to let them know what was happening. And that's actually the character that we are going to meet today. We are going to spend a little bit of time getting to know the shepherds. So I'm going to light a candle for the shepherds. And guys, this is probably my favorite week. For some reason, I really love this story of the shepherds. So I'm going to have you hear a little story from the shepherds themselves, and I'll be back with you in just a minute.
Be dressed for service and keep your lamps burning, as though you were waiting for your master to return. Then you will be ready to open the door and let him in the moment he arrives and knocks. The servants who are ready and waiting for his return will be rewarded.
We are shepherds, outcasts, the nobodies. There we were, out in our fields, sitting in the darkness, watching our sheep, and waiting for morning light to come. When suddenly, angels appeared with a message. Their light was so bright, we were terrified. They had told us that the Savior had been born to us in Bethlehem. To us, the nobodies, we matter to God, so we ran off to go see if this was true. Sure enough, there was baby Jesus, just as the angels had said. We couldn't keep this news to ourselves, so we told everyone who was willing to listen to nobody that Jesus, the Messiah, had come.
And we went back to our fields and worshiped.
Advent is waiting and watching and worshiping.
thing about these shepherds. Shepherds in this time, they were the nobodies. They lived out in the fields taking care of their sheep. The shepherds were probably dirty and smelly. They probably didn't shower every day. They didn't go to church every week. They certainly weren't the most educated bunch of guys. They were the nobodies. There's really no better word to describe them. And I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where I felt like the nobody. Have you ever felt like a nobody? Like you didn't fit in, or you didn't belong, or maybe nobody liked you? Those were the shepherds. And yet, God picked the shepherds to be the very first people to hear the news that Jesus had been born. That just blows my mind. Jesus didn't tell the priests first. He didn't tell the religious leaders first. He didn't tell, the guy who ran the newspaper or the town gossip. That's not who he chose to be the first ones to hear the very best news that had ever happened in the whole world. He chose the shepherds. He chose the nobodies. And I think that this tells us something really important about God's character and about how God feels about his people. Jesus came for everyone. Jesus did not just come for the wealthy or the privileged or the smartest or the best looking, or there's none of that. Jesus came for everybody. And he wanted to give that message loud and clear. And so the first people to get the news were the nobodies. And he was saying to their hearts, you matter. You are important. I came for you. Oh my gosh, what an incredible message. And the shepherds, I love their response. It wasn't like, wow, that's really great news. I guess we'll hear all about it later. No, they abandoned their sheep. They just left. They left. They said, let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened that the Lord has told us about. Oh my gosh, they just left. And they went and they found the baby Jesus, and their response to this infant was to bow down and worship him. I don't know if you have any infants in your home or if you've ever seen an infant, and they're cute and they're cuddly and you might want to hold them, you might want to stay far away from them, but I've never felt like I ought to bow down and worship a baby. And yet the shepherds recognized him as the king of the whole world. They recognized this infant as the one who had come to save them, the one that they had been waiting and watching for. So what was their response? They worshiped. They worshiped. And then I love what they did next. They didn't see the baby, have their experience, and think, wow, that was really special, but we better get back to the fields. It says that they told everybody who was willing to listen. They weren't afraid. They were so excited about the good news that it was just like spilling out of them. They just couldn't keep the news to themselves. It is such good news that God chose the shepherds to be a part of his first coming. It reminds us that God chooses us, you and me. We don't have to be anything special. We don't have to be the smartest or the best looking or the most talented or the fastest or any of that. We just have to be waiting. We need to keep our eyes open so that we don't miss it. And we need to be worshiping. And the shepherds teach us that when good news comes, we ought to tell everybody that we know. It doesn't matter if they're going to listen or not. But those shepherds just couldn't keep their mouth. They just couldn't keep their mouths shut about this good news. And you and I need to be the same way. We ought to be so excited about this story that we cannot keep our mouths shut. The best thing in the world has come. The promised Messiah that we have been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for has finally come. He is here. Such good news. That's why I love the story of the shepherds. They teach us so much about God's heart for us, and they teach us so much about how we ought to respond to good news. I hope you guys have a really great week. I know Christmas is coming closer and closer. You're probably about to go into your last week of school or whatever it is. And so remember, keep your eyes open. Look for what God is doing and how can you be a part of it? How can you share the good news with the people around you? Have a great week. You are so loved.